She hadn't seen her son in 18 years. But the moment I announced his inheritance on stage, she stormed into the auditorium, pointed at me, and shouted that I had kidnapped him. My knees trembled, but I didn't move. Because when a woman has been silent for too long, the truth becomes sharp. She left him in a box on my doorstep at 3 a.m. Now she wanted half of everything. But she had no idea what I had prepared for this day. What would happen when I made her lies public in front of the very people she tried to fool? I stood at the edge of the stage, hands steady despite the fire rolling in my chest. The applause for Jonah was still fading when the back doors slammed open. She walked in like she owned the place. 18 years without a single birthday card, a phone call, or even a whisper from her corner of the country. And now she showed up with high heels and lipstick and a camera crew following her in. Monica Vega, my former daughter-in-law, the girl who left her baby in a cardboard box outside my door at 3 in the morning. And now, here she was, striding straight down the aisle of her son's graduation like a show pony, reaching for the microphone before anyone could stop her. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Jonah. She looked straight into the crowd and said, calm as anything, I have something to say. That woman on stage kidnapped my son. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Cameras stopped flashing. One of the teachers dropped their clipboard. I didn't flinch. When a woman's been burned for nearly 2 decades and survived, shame loses its sting. Jonah was frozen in his seat. His cap was still tilted on his head, his diploma halfway in his hand. I saw his fingers grip it tighter, his jaw locked. That told me everything. He hadn't known she was coming. She hadn't called. She hadn't asked. She had ambushed him. Just like she had ambushed me 18 years ago. Just like the night she vanished. I stepped up to the microphone. I didn't plan to speak again, but silence is for the weak. And I was not weak anymore. Let me clarify something, I said. That child she abandoned when he was 4 months old has become the young man you see here today. And the only kidnapping that ever happened was the one she did to herself, disappearing without a trace while her baby cried for hours in a house with no formula, no diapers, and no mother. Someone from the audience murmured something, but I kept going. I raised this boy. Every scraped knee, every math test, every fever and nightmare. She never showed up. Not once. And now, on the day he graduates with honors and a full scholarship, she walks in like she never left. I pulled the folded document from my purse and handed it to the principal. Please read that, I told him. He hesitated, but when he saw the bold signature, he looked over at me, then at Jonah, then cleared his throat and read. The audience listened to every word, a notarized statement. Monica Vega, dated 18 years ago, full relinquishment of parental rights. She had signed it herself. I heard someone in the crowd gasp. A low whisper swept through the rows. And Monica, she was already turning red, not because she was sorry, but because she had been exposed. Still, she raised her chin and said, I was under pressure. I didn't know what I was signing. The principal looked uncomfortable. Jonah still hadn't moved. His head was down now, shoulders stiff. I could feel it from across the room. He was humiliated, not by me, not by what I said, but by the fact that she had done this here, today, in front of everyone who mattered to him. I wanted to walk down and hold him, but I knew better. He needed space. So I stayed still and spoke louder. You had 18 years to reach out, and you waited until today, until I announced his inheritance, until you found out he was finally about to get something you never gave him, a stable future. Security, family, everything you walked away from. She tried to interrupt me, but someone in the audience clapped. Then another, and another. It wasn't for me, it was for Jonah, For the kid who had every reason to fall apart, but didn't. I looked at him, still frozen in his chair, his fists clenched on his diploma. I saw it in his eyes, even from where I stood. He was deciding something, not just about her, but about himself, about me, about where his future began, and where his past would stay buried. And I'll be honest with you, if you're still listening, at that moment, I didn't know what he would choose, and that terrified me more than anything. But what I did know was this. Monica had just opened a door she wouldn't be able to close, and I had spent 18 years getting ready to walk through it. Because there's a difference between being silent and being weak, and after tonight, she was going to learn that the hard way. Jonah didn't come home that night. I waited until midnight, kept his dinner warm, left the porch light on like I used to when he was 15 and stayed out late studying at the library. But this time, the silence didn't feel like a teenager stretching his wings. It felt like a grown boy being pulled back into something I had spent nearly 2 decades shielding him from. When I finally went to bed, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the fan hum like a steady reminder that the house was still here, still safe. That hadn't changed. The next morning I found him sitting on the back steps. He was wearing the same clothes from the night before, his graduation cap tucked under one arm like he couldn't decide whether to throw it away or hold it tighter. I brought him coffee. He didn't speak for a minute, just held the cup and stared out at the fence where he used to practice throwing a baseball against the boards until I begged him to stop cracking the wood. Then he finally said, "I don't know what just happened." I sat beside him. The morning air was still cool, and the ground smelled of dew and rosemary. "You mean last night?" I said. He nodded. "And her. She wasn't even on my mind. Not once. I didn't expect to see her ever again." He rubbed his forehead, like the whole thing had cracked something loose inside him. I didn't say anything, just let him breathe. Then he looked at me. Not like a boy, not like a student, but like a man trying to decide whether to believe in the people around him. "Did you know she was coming?" "No." He nodded again. "I believe you." Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. It was creased and smudged at the edges. I recognized the shape of it before he even opened it. "She found me after the ceremony," he said. "Gave me this." He handed it to me. A printout of an email chain, Monica's name on it, a lawyer's name I didn't recognize, and at the bottom, a short note in her handwriting. "Let's talk. I'm ready to be your mother again." I folded it shut. Jonah took the paper back and stared at it. "She wants to meet, just to talk." I said nothing. He went on. "She said she was young, scared. She said she made a mistake, but she wants to be a part of things now." I stood up. The grass hadn't been mowed in a week. The weeds were creeping along the edge of the stepping stones. I made a note to take care of it later. I told him, "You're 18 now. I won't tell you what to do, but I won't pretend this is harmless either." He looked up. "I'm not stupid, Grandma." "No," I said. "You're not, but you've got a soft heart. She knows that." He didn't argue. A few hours later he left, said he needed to think. I let him go. By evening I was already 3 steps ahead. I called Roland. Roland Green was never one for small talk. When he picked up, all he said was, "I saw the clip online." Of course he had. "You still have that paperwork I signed with Monica?" I said. "Every copy." "Good." We set a meeting for the next morning. At his house, he laid out every page like a forensic pathologist laying bare a crime scene. Her signature, her statement, the dates, the notary stamp. It was all clean. Then he leaned back and said, "But if she's coming in through the back door, you'll need more than just paper. You'll need pressure." I already knew what that meant. Later that week, I met with Angela Kim. She was sharp, young, the kind who didn't blink when the truth got messy. I handed her a folder, told her I wasn't ready for a public piece yet. Just background, for now. She flipped through it. Government filings, school forms, pediatric records, everything with my name on it, none with Monica's. She closed the folder, looked up and said, "This woman trying to reclaim motherhood after disappearing for 18 years. That's a story." "Not yet," I told her, "but it will be." I left the cafe with my heart steady, because I wasn't panicking, I wasn't spiraling, I was preparing. I had waited 18 years for the truth to matter, and now that she had the nerve to come back, I would make sure it did. 3 days passed before Jonah said her name again. He came home late, the smell of diner grease still clinging to his jacket. He had taken a part-time job to save for college, even though I told him he didn't need to. That was always his way, working hard for what had already been given to him, as if earning it twice would make it feel more secure. He stood in the kitchen doorway and said it flat, with no emotion behind it. She asked to meet this weekend. I turned off the stove, let the silence stretch for a moment. I didn't ask where. I didn't ask how. I only said, "Are you going?" He didn't answer right away, just leaned against the frame, arms crossed like his father used to do when he was trying not to look shaken. "I think I have to, just to know." I nodded. He started to turn away, then stopped. "If she says anything about you, I won't believe it." "I know," I said, and I meant it. But belief isn't the problem. Timing is. And Monica always had perfect timing when it came to disruption. The next morning I was already moving. There was no use pretending this was going away on its own. Roland and I had agreed. She was testing the waters, and if she found them warm, she'd dive straight in. So I called in the favor that counted most. Mariah Torres didn't answer right away. When she finally picked up, her voice was tight, as if she already knew something was wrong. "Heard about the graduation," she said. "It's all over the teacher group chats." I told her I needed a few minutes. She said she could be over in 20. Mariah had taught Jonah for 3 years. She wasn't just a teacher. She was the kind who packed granola bars in her desk drawer for kids who came to school hungry. She was the kind who stayed late to tutor without asking for extra pay. She was the kind who kept her eye on the children who didn't always have someone watching over them. And she had watched Jonah closely, especially in the early years when his confusion about why his mother wasn't around started to settle into quiet shame. She showed up at my door with her hair still damp from a shower and a folder under her arm. I didn't ask what was inside. I just poured coffee and told her what I needed. She didn't hesitate. "You need a statement," she said. "I'll write it. But you should also think about going public. If this woman's serious, she's going to start twisting the narrative. You've got to get ahead of it." I didn't tell her about Angela Kim just yet. That part was still baking. Instead, I said, "Can you help him understand what he's lived through, from your side?" She paused, then said, "That boy deserves the truth. So do you." She left the folder with me. Inside were records, school attendance sheets, notes from conferences, printed photos from field trips, little breadcrumbs that showed the full picture. Jonah and me, year after year. Monica's name appeared exactly 0 times. After Mariah left, I sat with the folder in my lap for a long time. Then I opened the laptop. Angela replied within 15 minutes. Her message was short. "Let's meet." We chose a neutral spot, a cafe off the main street. Nothing fancy, just quiet enough for what I needed to say. Angela didn't waste time. She came with a recorder, a notebook, and a look in her eyes that told me she'd covered worse stories than mine. She'd seen mothers walk away. She'd seen systems fail. But what caught her attention now was the return. A mother reappearing after 18 years. I gave her the timeline, the facts. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just laid it down in clean, dry lines. The date Monica dropped Jonah off, the conditions he arrived in, the lack of contact, the sudden reappearance, the staged confrontation at graduation, the inheritance announcement. Angela's pen barely stopped moving. Then I gave her the supporting documents, the signed waiver, the notarized form, the folder from Mariah. She flipped through, nodding, quiet, focused. When we finished, she closed the notebook and said, "This needs to be told, not later, now." I told her I wasn't ready for a headline, not yet, but I wanted the ground prepared, in case Monica pushed further. If she made a public move, we'd be ready to answer. Angela promised discretion. I believed her. She had that solid steadiness that didn't come with ambition, but with conviction. I returned home to find Jonah asleep on the porch swing. His backpack lay at his feet. The graduation tassel hung from the zipper. He had a shadow under his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. I let him sleep. I sat in the chair across from him and watched the sun dip below the trees. I had raised this boy from the moment his lungs first screamed into the morning air without his mother nearby. I had held him when he ran his first fever, listened when he whispered that the other kids had dads at the park. I had watched his back stiffen when Mother's Day cards were assigned in class. He had built a life without her, without even knowing what it meant to miss her. And now she wanted to insert herself back in, like history could be rewritten with a single conversation. I knew better. She wasn't coming back for Jonah. She was coming back for what Jonah had now. I had seen this before. I had seen what happened when broken people smelled opportunity. They didn't fix themselves. They sharpened their tools. I leaned back in the chair and looked up at the stars beginning to show through the purple sky. This wasn't over. She wasn't finished. And neither was I. It was a Friday morning when Mariah called and told me she was ready. She didn't sound hesitant. There was no tremble in her voice. She spoke like someone who had made peace with the decision and was now moving forward, one step at a time, no matter who it unsettled. I told her I would meet her at the school library. It was quiet in the mornings, just before the teachers started filing in with coffee and lesson plans and stacks of graded homework. She was waiting near the back, seated in one of the old reading chairs that had been there since before Jonah was born. Her folder was already open in her lap. She looked up, gave me a short nod, and said, "I typed the statement, but I also included a few photos, not just of Jonah, but of the events. You know, things that show your presence." She handed it to me. I read every word. It wasn't just a character letter. It was a timeline. A careful, unflinching account from a professional educator who had observed our life from a distance close enough to see clearly, but far enough to remain objective. She listed the years she taught Jonah. Specific days I'd stayed behind to speak about his behavior or grades. She described the parent-teacher conferences where I was the only one who showed up, always alone, always with notes in hand. She mentioned the spring concert, where I brought Jonah straight from the hospital after he'd had a fever for 3 days, just so he wouldn't miss his first cello performance. She detailed the day he cried in the hallway when someone asked about his mother, and I had to come early to calm him down before the final exam. Every sentence carried weight, because none of it was sentimental. It was factual, just a record of things seen. And for once, that was all I needed. At the end of the page, she signed her name. I closed the folder and said, "Thank you." She nodded again, then said, "You don't need to thank me. I've watched what you've done for that boy, and I've watched what she hasn't. I left the school without saying anything more. There wasn't anything left to add." That afternoon, I took the letter to Roland. He read it slowly, one finger tracking each line like a man checking a blueprint before construction begins. When he finished, he placed the folder down and leaned back in his chair. "This puts her on the defense," he said. "This is what you use when she tries to turn public opinion. And she will." Then he asked if I had spoken to Angela yet. I told him we met. She was preparing a background draft, nothing released yet, just groundwork. "Good," he said, "because once Monica feels the wind turning, she'll try to twist it again. She won't back down." Not at first. I went home before sunset. Jonah's car wasn't in the driveway. I waited in the kitchen until well after dark, sipping tea that had gone cold twice. Around 10, he came in. His face was tight, eyes red but not from crying, just tired. Like whatever had happened drained the last ounce of patience from him. He walked straight to the sink, poured himself a glass of water, then leaned against the counter. "I saw her," he said. I didn't speak. I let him have the space. "She took me to this little cafe outside of town, said she wanted to talk without interruptions. I think she thought I would be excited." I nodded, letting him go on. "She told me how much she regretted things, said she was young, said no one helped her. Then she said something about wishing we could start fresh." His voice faltered a little there, but he kept going. "Then she mentioned the house, the money, said she was glad I'd have a future, that she hoped I'd remember who brought me into this world." He looked down at his hands. His knuckles were white. I asked her why she really came back. She didn't answer, just smiled. That same smile from the graduation stage, the one that makes your skin go cold. He looked up. I told her not to contact me again. Then I walked out. For the first time in a while, I didn't feel the need to breathe for him. He had done it himself. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a necklace. Just a cheap one. A metal chain with a small charm, the kind of thing you find in tourist shops. "She gave this to me. Said she bought it the year I was born and kept it all these years." He placed it on the table between us. "I don't want it," he said. I picked it up. It was warm from his skin, light, hollow. I didn't say anything. Instead, I took it, walked to the sink, and dropped it in the drawer under the cleaning supplies. Not trash, not kept, just away. Jonah sat down across from me. He looked older than he had last week. Not in the way lines form on a face, but in the way silence settles in the shoulders. We didn't talk more that night. But when he hugged me before bed, it was tighter than usual. Less about comfort, more about certainty. The next morning, I called Angela. I told her it was time. No delays, no more waiting. We agreed to publish the article in 2 days. Mariah's letter would be quoted, my statement would be included. Photos, records, all of it. She asked if I was sure. I told her I was. This wasn't about revenge. This was about documentation, about not letting the past rewrite itself into a softer version just because someone finally felt like returning. And once it was out there, Monica would have no stage left to stand on. Not in this town, not in this story. She had chosen the public path when she shouted her lie into a microphone. Now she would get to walk that path all the way through, with the truth catching up behind her, step for step. The article went live on a quiet Sunday morning. There was no announcement, no headline in flashing lights. Just a single post on the front page of the community news site. No dramatic image. Just a photo of Jonah from his school's awards ceremony last spring, standing between me and his principal. He was smiling, not because he was told to, but because in that moment he was proud. The title read, simple and clean, 18 years without a word, the grandmother who raised him. Angela had written it with precision. She laid out the facts. She quoted Mariah's letter in full. She listed the legal filings, the timelines, the lack of contact, the day Monica appeared on stage. And she left room for readers to feel what they needed to feel, without telling them what to think. It was the kind of article that didn't make people argue. It made them quiet. By noon, it had spread through the school district. By evening, it was being shared on the regional news aggregator. And by Monday, Monica's name wasn't just whispered. It was spoken aloud, without hesitation. I didn't post anything. I didn't comment. I didn't check reactions or read every thread. I didn't need to. Jonah came home from work that night with his phone buzzing non-stop. He set it face down on the counter and said, "It's everywhere." I said nothing. "She sent a message," he added. I looked at him. He kept his eyes low. She said she didn't expect me to take sides, that she understands how hard this must be for me. Then she said she forgives me. I blinked once. Jonah scoffed, more bitter than angry. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I asked her to leave me alone. He turned away, but I could feel it in his posture. He was done waiting for her to grow into the mother he had never had. He finally saw her as she was, not as he had once hoped she might become. And once that illusion broke, there was no putting it back together. 2 days later, the phone rang at 6:45 in the morning. The name on the screen read, Angela. I picked up. She sounded calm, firm. "You should know," she said. Her lawyer contacted the paper. I asked what kind of contact. She said the words carefully. They claimed defamation, requested a retraction. I didn't speak. Angela added, "We're not taking it down. Everything is backed by documented sources. But it tells me she's rattled. And rattled people don't stop. They shift tactics." She wasn't wrong. By that afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. No subject line, no greeting, just 4 words. "We need to talk," no signature. But I didn't need one. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed it, filed it with everything else. If this became legal, I would need a full record, every step, every attempt. Roland called that night. "She's making noise," he said. "Threats, mostly, but nothing that holds water. Still, I think it's time we talk next moves." I told him I was ready. We set a meeting for Friday. But Thursday came with something unexpected. Jonah had just left for a shift. I was standing in the backyard, watching 2 squirrels chase each other along the fence line, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. I walked around the side just as Monica stepped out. She was dressed clean, nothing flashy. No heels, no lipstick. Just a plain blouse and dark jeans. But the look in her eyes hadn't changed. Still measured, still watching, still calculating. She didn't speak right away. Neither did I. Finally, she said, "You're destroying my life." I crossed my arms. "You think this is justice," she continued. "But it's just revenge. You've turned my son against me." He turned on his own. "You gave him the reason." Her mouth tightened. "I came back because I wanted to fix things." "No. You came back because he was about to inherit. Because you thought there might still be a way to claim something that was never yours." She stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "I don't care about the money. Then walk away. You think I haven't lost enough? I stared at her. You lost him the day you left him on my porch and never looked back. You lost the right to speak as if we were equals the day you waited 18 years and still didn't come to apologize. You lost the benefit of doubt when you made this public before you made it honest. Monica opened her mouth again, but nothing came. For a moment, I almost believed there was something behind her silence. Regret, shame, clarity. But it passed. Her jaw set. Her eyes went cold. You'll regret this, she said. I already did. Years ago, when I believed you might come back as something better. Now I don't expect anything at all. She walked away without another word. I watched the car drive off until it disappeared down the street. I stood there for a long while, let the breeze push past my sleeves, let the weight of the moment sink into my skin like sun after a storm. That night, Jonah came home and asked if anything happened. I told him she came by. He nodded once, then said nothing more. He didn't ask what she said. He didn't press for details, because he didn't need them. Whatever thread had connected him to her had finally snapped, not with violence, not with shouting, just with time, truth, and the steady unraveling of a lie that had outlived its silence. The day after Monica showed up unannounced, things began to shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than I expected. Like watching a pane of glass begin to crack, not with a shatter, but with a faint, deliberate line stretching slowly across its center. I was sitting at the kitchen table, going over some old documents I had stored in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. They were records I hadn't touched in years. Jonah's early pediatric visits, notes from his speech therapist when he was 4, a hand-drawn family tree project from 3rd grade, where he wrote my name under the word Mum. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just grounding myself, reminding myself of what had been real all along. Not the noise Monica had brought into the room, but the life we had built without her. That's when the first phone call came. It wasn't a friend or neighbor. It was someone from the district office. A woman whose voice I recognized but whose name I had never remembered. She called to say she had read the article and just wanted to express support. She said there had been whispers about Monica in past years, even before she reappeared. Financial issues, a short-lived job in procurement, a resignation that came without warning. I thanked her, kept it brief, and hung up. But I knew what was happening. The cracks were spreading. By the afternoon, Roland called with a new update. She's getting pressure from her lawyer, he said. He wants her to back off. He's reading the temperature and doesn't like what he sees. Community support for you is stronger than she anticipated. He paused, then added, but she's not ready to walk away. Not yet. I knew that already. Monica had never been the type to retreat unless she was cornered, and even then, she liked to find a way to make it look like it was her decision all along. Still, I could feel it. Her grip was slipping. She had walked into this thinking it would be a clean play, show up, claim her role, stir just enough sympathy to create confusion. But she miscalculated something vital. People remember the ones who stay. Angela published a second follow-up on Thursday. This one included short interviews, quotes from Jonah's teachers, neighbors, even one of the nurses from the clinic we used to visit when he was little. It painted a portrait that wasn't flashy, just steady. Me taking Jonah to appointments, me volunteering at school, me holding his hand in the waiting room. No attacks, no accusations, just a record of presence. That was all it took. Friday morning, I opened the front door and found a manila envelope on the welcome mat. No postage, no name. Inside was a typed letter from Monica's attorney. It was short, 4 paragraphs. It stated that Monica would be pursuing a formal petition to establish herself as Jonah's legal maternal guardian. It cited biological ties. It referenced the previous waiver she had signed as potentially coerced under emotional distress. It requested a court review of custody records and financial assets related to Jonah's pending inheritance. I stood in the doorway for a moment, the letter loose in my hand, the morning light falling across my feet. Then I stepped back inside and picked up the phone. Roland answered on the second ring. I read him the letter. He didn't sound surprised. "She's going to try and make it legal," he said. "She's betting that with enough noise, something will stick. That maybe a judge will call a hearing just to settle it. And in that room, she thinks she can play victim." "Can she?" He paused. "Only if we let her get there first." I met with Roland that afternoon. We went over every piece of documentation again. The waiver, the custody filings, the years of tax records showing Jonah listed as my dependent, school authorizations, emergency contact forms, the envelope of photographs Angela had collected for her first article. We reviewed it like we were preparing for trial, because maybe we were. That evening, Jonah came home from his shift and saw the letter on the table. He read it in full, quietly. His expression didn't change. When he finished, he folded it once and looked at me. "Do we need to fight her in court?" I told him I hoped not, but if we did, we were ready. He nodded. Then he walked over to the cabinet and pulled out the old scrapbook we used to keep when he was younger. He sat across from me and opened it. Inside were pictures from every birthday, school projects, camp certificates, a crayon drawing of me holding his hand outside a house with a red roof. On the top corner, in shaky letters, he had written my name, Grandma. He turned one page at a time, slowly, until he reached the end. Then he closed the book. "She can't erase this," he said. I knew he was right. But I also knew Monica wasn't trying to erase what had been done. She was trying to replace it, to put herself into a story she had never lived, and to do that, she would burn the pages that didn't include her. So we got ready. Roland filed a motion that Monday. It was short, direct, and built entirely on evidence. No emotion, no narrative, just facts. We weren't going to argue about who had the better story. We were going to show who had actually lived it. And the truth, no matter how quietly it had survived until now, was finally ready to speak. The town library had always been a quiet place, neutral ground. That's why I chose it. I didn't need a stage, just a room with enough chairs and enough truth. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. I reserved the small event room in the back, the one with beige walls and too much fluorescent light. No microphones, no podium, just a row of folding chairs and a long table I covered with a plain white cloth. I didn't advertise the meeting. I didn't invite everyone. I asked only for those who had lived close enough to know, the ones who had seen Jonah grow up, the ones who had watched him walk to school in the rain, who had seen him mowing lawns in the summer, who had bought raffle tickets when he sold them for science club. They showed up, one by one. Mariah came with a copy of her statement in hand. She wore her school badge clipped to her shirt. She didn't say much, but the way she greeted Jonah with a soft hand on his shoulder said more than enough. Angela sat in the back, notepad in her lap. She wasn't there to lead. She was there to listen. Roland stood near the door, arms crossed, keeping a quiet eye on everything. Jonah stood beside me for the first part, hands in his pockets, back straight. He didn't smile, but he didn't look afraid either. When the room had filled, I stepped forward. I didn't open with a speech. I didn't thank them for coming. I simply told the truth. I spoke of the morning Monica left Jonah on my porch, of the years after, of the papers she signed, of the birthdays missed and the graduations she never asked about. I described the scraped knees, the broken arm, the homework battles, and the long nights sitting by his bed during thunderstorms. Then I opened the folders on the table. I passed around copies of school authorizations, letters from teachers, photographs from every year. Each one showed the same pattern: me, Jonah, and a gap where she should have been. Mariah stepped up next. She read her statement clearly. Her voice didn't shake. She ended by saying, "He never once mentioned her, not in anger, not in longing, just silence, because that was all he had ever been given." After that, Roland stood and gave a short legal explanation of Monica's signed waiver. He didn't editorialize. He just stated what had been filed, when, and by whom. Angela said nothing. She kept taking notes. By the end, no one in the room had asked for anything more. They had heard enough. But then the door opened. Monica walked in like she hadn't caused the fracture in the first place, like she belonged there. She wore a soft blue blouse, understated jewelry, her hair pulled back like she was trying to appear smaller, less threatening. She looked around and spoke to the room like we were in a church, not a public building. She said she came to speak her truth. She said she had made mistakes, that she had suffered, that she was being misrepresented. She said she had every right to seek reconnection, that she deserved forgiveness, that no one should judge her for what they hadn't lived through. I didn't interrupt her. No one did. When she was done, she looked at Jonah. She called him son. He didn't move. Then I stood and walked back to the front. I didn't address her directly. I spoke to the room. I said that forgiveness does not erase consequences, that showing up late doesn't mean you still get to take the seat you abandoned, that claiming motherhood requires more than biology. I said it calmly, slowly, and then I sat down. Jonah didn't speak. He didn't have to. After a long pause, Monica turned and walked out. This time, she didn't slam the door. She didn't look back. When the room emptied, Jonah stayed behind. He helped me pack the folders. He folded the tablecloth. He stacked chairs. When everything was done, we walked out together. On the way home, he didn't say anything until we reached the stoplight near the gas station where he used to beg me for bubble gum. He looked straight ahead and said, "I feel like I can breathe." That night, I received an email from Angela. Her article would run in the morning. This one would have a title with weight. It would say what needed to be said. And after that, I knew the silence would fall back into place, not as fear, but as peace. Because the reckoning was no longer mine to carry. It had been handed over, to fact, to community, to time, and finally to Jonah himself. The article dropped at 6:45 in the morning. This one wasn't subtle. Angela had titled it plainly, "The Mother Who Left and the Grandmother Who Stayed." By 7:30, the town had read it. By 8, the school district had shared it across internal networks. By 9, the city's morning radio station had mentioned it in their news brief. Angela had done what she promised. She didn't embellish. She didn't twist. But she didn't hold back either. She quoted Monica directly from the meeting at the library. She included photographs from the last 18 years. She embedded legal documents with clear timestamps and signatures. She interviewed neighbors, teachers, and former co-workers. The story was clean and complete. It didn't argue. It revealed. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, the laptop open in front of me, and I read it once. Then I closed the lid. I didn't need to see the comments. I didn't need to measure the reaction. The truth had been released. And now it would do what the truth always does. It would land where it needed to, fall apart what needed to be broken, and protect what had already withstood too much. Around noon, Roland called. He didn't say hello. He just said, "She's been served." I asked if it came from the state or the local authorities. Both. He explained that based on the details included in the article and the investigation Angela had prompted with her reporting, the fraud division had picked up the case. Monica had applied for housing and medical benefits over the years, using Jonah's name. She had claimed him as a dependent for several years after she had already signed away her rights. The numbers weren't huge, but they were just high enough to trigger criminal scrutiny. I didn't speak. I waited. He went on. Her current employer was notified. They suspended her until further notice, and her landlord received a copy of the complaint. If she defaults again, she'll be removed. Then he said, "This is where the fall begins, and it won't be loud. It'll be long." I hung up and went to the back porch. The sun was high. The neighborhood was quiet. Birds moved between trees without much urgency. Jonah was at work. He wouldn't hear any of this until later. But I already knew how he would respond. He would ask if we needed to do anything, and I would tell him no. Because for once, justice didn't need our hands. It had picked up speed on its own. Later that afternoon, I received a message. It wasn't from Monica. It came from someone who used to work with her at a small retail chain across the state line. A woman named Patrice. She said she didn't want to get involved, but that she had read the article and recognized Monica's name. She said Monica had borrowed money from several co-workers over the years, claimed she was trying to reconnect with her child, claimed she needed help hiring a lawyer to fight a cruel grandmother. Patrice didn't ask for anything. She just wanted to say she was sorry for believing Monica. I thanked her and left it at that. The message lingered with me all evening. It was the first time I realized Monica had been preparing this long before she arrived at the graduation. She had been planting her story for months, maybe years, getting ready to flip the truth upside down. But what she didn't count on was how heavy lies get when the wind shifts. By Sunday morning, Angela sent me a single sentence. "You're safe to let go now." I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the bookshelf in the hallway, pulled down the thick blue folder where I had kept every legal paper related to Jonah's custody, and placed it inside a drawer. Not because it wasn't important, but because I no longer needed it to be in reach. In the afternoon, Jonah came home early. He walked into the kitchen, set his bag down, and poured himself a glass of water. Then he sat at the table across from me. "I saw the article," he said. "I waited. She won't come back from this." I nodded. He looked tired, not in body, but in spirit, like something had finally unclenched. "It's strange," he added. "I always thought it would feel more dramatic, like some kind of final scene. But it's just quieter than I thought. That's how real endings usually feel." He nodded. Then he said, "I'm not angry at her anymore." That surprised me. Not because I wanted him to stay angry, but because I had lived with my own bitterness for so long that I had forgotten what it looked like to release it early, to let it pass through you instead of letting it build a home. He looked at me again, not with pain, just clarity. "I know who raised me." That night, after he went to bed, I sat on the porch and thought about what it meant to finally exhale. For 18 years, I had carried the weight of a silence that didn't belong to me. Monica left, and I had filled in the absence, not just with food and clothing and rides to school, but with my very self, my time, my identity. I had become what she discarded. Now, standing here at the edge of her unraveling, I didn't feel victorious. I felt still. The storm had passed, and all that remained was the clean air after. No vengeance, no fire, just space. And maybe, somewhere in that space, Something new would begin, not for her, but for us, for me, and for the boy I raised into a man. The week after the article, I waited. Not for Monica, not for the public's reaction. That had already taken its course. What I waited for was the silence, the real kind, the one that settles in once the noise burns out and the smoke stops rising. That silence, I had learned, told more truth than any headline. By Tuesday, Roland confirmed that Monica's petition had been withdrawn. No public statement, no apology, just paperwork signed and delivered by her attorney. The same man who once sent threats now sent formal closure. He called it a resolution. I didn't. Resolution suggests both parties walk away on equal terms. This wasn't that. This was the quiet collapsing of a false claim. It was an exit with the door gently closed, not slammed, because the hinges were already loose. Still, when I got the official word, I stood in the living room, holding the notice, and let myself sit down for the first time in days. Not just physically, fully, like my body could finally stop leaning forward, waiting for the next hit. There would be no more documents, no hearings, no attorneys waiting on the other end of a phone. I was done. Jonah came home that evening with a box in his hands. He had cleared out his locker at the restaurant. He said they were letting staff go for the season. Fewer shifts, less traffic now that summer was winding down. I offered him dinner. He said he'd already eaten. Then he placed a sealed envelope on the table. From her, he said. He didn't open it. He didn't plan to. I didn't ask why he kept it. Maybe part of him needed to hold the last attempt she made before stepping away. Or maybe he needed to see that it no longer had power. I left it untouched. The next morning, I opened the hallway closet and started sorting. It had been years since I'd gone through those boxes. Some were full of old bills. Others held Jonah's school artwork. A few still smelled faintly of baby powder. I found a onesie from when he was just over a year old, tucked next to a blanket I used to keep in the car. None of it made me cry. There was no wave of nostalgia, no sting of regret. There was just the recognition that we had been through something, and somehow, despite every bend in the road, we had made it here, together. That evening, I lit a candle and sat outside. It had rained earlier. The yard smelled clean. The air had cooled. It felt like something was ready to end. Not painfully, just honestly. Jonah came out with 2 mugs of tea. He handed me one and sat down across from me. I asked if he was tired. He said no. Then he said, "I've been thinking about the house." I waited. He looked at me, not searching for permission, just sharing. "I don't think I want to keep it here," he said. "Not forever. Not after college." I nodded. He added, "It holds everything, but maybe too much." I understood. Memory is a heavy tenant. Sometimes it overstays, even when it was invited in with love. He said, "I want to build something that doesn't start with a scar." That stayed with me. Not because it hurt, but because it was true. I didn't raise him to stay trapped inside my version of the story. I raised him so he could write his own. Later that week, he began organizing his things. He didn't say it, but I could tell. He was preparing for the next chapter. College, a different city, a new rhythm. I helped him without ceremony, folded clothes, sorted old textbooks, packed photos into a box he labeled Keep. Then he handed me one item I didn't expect. It was a printed copy of the article Angela had written. The second one. He had highlighted a paragraph. It was the part where she wrote, "The woman who stood for him, every year, every season, was never announced, never honored. But she held the weight until he could stand for himself." He didn't say anything. He just folded the page, placed it inside a frame, and handed it to me. "For your shelf," he said. I didn't cry, but something inside me settled, something that had been restless for a long, long time. Because that paragraph was more than words. It was the quiet answer to every time I had wondered if it mattered, if it showed, if the small things, the unnoticed things, had ever really meant anything. Now I knew. The fire had passed, the ashes had cooled, and in the space left behind, something softer began to take shape. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. And peace, I had learned, doesn't come loudly. It comes when you are no longer fighting to prove what was already true, when you are finally free to stop surviving and start simply being. And that, after all these years, was more than enough. It was mid-August when the letter came. Not from Monica this time, not from her attorney or the county clerk. This letter arrived by standard mail, no return address, just my name written carefully on the envelope. The handwriting was familiar, not rushed, not neat either, like someone trying too hard to be calm. I knew before I opened it. I sat at the dining table with the afternoon light falling through the window. The house was still. Jonah had left for a campus orientation that morning, and the silence that followed him had a different texture now. Not heavy, just new. I unfolded the letter and read it once, slowly. Monica had written 5 paragraphs. She said she wasn't proud of what she had done. She said the articles had exposed more than just her lies. They had exposed who she had become, or maybe who she had always been. She didn't ask for forgiveness, not directly, but she hinted at it. She said she had started therapy, that she was living in a smaller place now, that the investigation was still open, but her lawyer believed it might not go to trial. She wrote that she missed him, that she still called him her son, even if he no longer called her anything at all. And at the very end, she asked if she could speak with me. Just once. Not for reconciliation, not for resolution, just to say what needed to be said. I placed the letter back in the envelope and slid it into the drawer with the rest. Then I waited. 3 days later, I drove to the coffee shop where we used to meet when Jonah was still a toddler, and I had to bring him along in a stroller. The place hadn't changed much. Same wooden booths, same chalkboard menu, same chipped mugs and slow service. I chose a corner seat by the window. She arrived on time. Her clothes were simple, her hair pulled back, no jewelry, no dramatic entrance, just a woman walking through the door with her shoulders too straight for someone truly humbled. She didn't sit right away. When she did, she didn't meet my eyes. The silence between us stretched. Not awkward, just unfamiliar. Finally, she spoke. She said she wasn't expecting me to reply, that she had written the letter more for herself than for me. But when I showed up, she realized she didn't know what to do with that grace. I told her to speak, and I would listen. Nothing more. She nodded. She began with Jonah. Said she remembered the way he looked when he was born. Said she used to dream about what he sounded like at 12, at 15, at 18. She said she followed him from a distance, that she saw his name on honor rolls and team rosters, that every time she thought about coming back, she convinced herself it was too late. Then one day she convinced herself it wasn't. That was the day she showed up at the graduation. I asked her why she did it that way. She said she thought if she didn't make it dramatic, no one would listen. I said, "You were wrong." She agreed. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. She said she envied me. Not because I raised him, but because I never stopped. She said she had never finished anything in her life until she saw how I had finished everything she started and abandoned. That seeing him become someone decent was proof that the world didn't bend to mistakes if someone else was strong enough to keep pushing. I asked her what she wanted from me now. She said she didn't know. Then she said, I thought maybe you'd be the only one willing to believe I could change. I told her change is not something you present. It's something you live, quietly, over time, without asking for applause. She didn't respond. She just nodded. After a moment, she asked if I hated her. I told her I did, for a long time. But that hate had turned into something else. Not forgiveness, not even indifference, just distance, the kind that holds the past where it belongs. Then she asked the only thing that caught me off guard. She said, if he ever does want to speak to me, will you tell him I'm still here? I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, if that day comes, it won't be because of me. It will be because of who he has chosen to become. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply said, I understand. She stood, left enough cash on the table for her coffee, and walked out without saying goodbye. I stayed a while longer. I watched the cars pass outside the window, people coming and going from the bookstore across the street. No one knew what had just been spoken in that quiet corner booth, and they didn't need to. That conversation wasn't for public record. It wasn't revenge or closure or even redemption. It was a final line being drawn between two lives that once intersected through a child neither of us truly deserved at the beginning. But one of us stayed, and one of us didn't. That was never going to be erased. But from that day on, I knew I didn't need to carry the rest of her story anymore. It belonged to her. And now, finally, it would stay there. The first time Jonah ever stood behind a microphone, he was 7 years old, holding a paper sunflower he had made in class for Grandparents' Day. That day, he had shyly thanked me for being both grandma and mum. I never forgot his voice trembling through that small act of love. Now, at 25, he stood behind a different microphone, in front of a sea of suits and cameras, at the press conference we never thought we would hold. I had been quiet about the estate for years. No interviews, no public donations in my name, no stories in the newspaper. It wasn't secrecy. It was safety. But after what Monica had tried to do, again, we had to make some things unshakably clear. The event was held at the community hall. Jonah had chosen the place himself. Not too grand, not too small. The kind of space that made people feel seen, not out of place. We set up simple white chairs, local reporters, a few non-profit leaders, and, to Jonah's request, a live stream for his former classmates, mentors, and friends who couldn't be there in person. He opened with grace. He thanked the crowd for coming. Then he said, in his calm, assured voice, that he was no longer just someone's son or someone's grandson. He was a man who had been raised with the truth, and he intended to live by it. Then he handed me the folder. I stepped forward and opened the documents I had prepared. They were not contracts. They were not lawsuits. They were legacy statements. I read aloud the key facts. That Monica had willingly surrendered parental rights in the winter of 2006, notarized and legally bound. That I had full guardianship for the entirety of Jonah's childhood. That she had no legal or financial ties to the home, the trust, or the inheritance she had tried to stake a claim to. And finally, that a new trust had been established in Jonah's name, one that could not be challenged by anyone, without documented familial contribution and consent. There were no applause, just silence. That kind of silence where people take in the weight of what they're hearing, the kind that stays with you. I closed the folder and stepped aside. Jonah wasn't finished. He took the microphone again and said something I hadn't expected. He spoke not just about his past, but about the future. He said the trust would be used, in part, to establish a foundation. not just in my name, but in honor of women like me, grandmothers, aunts, foster mothers, caregivers who had stepped into the gap and never asked to be called heroes. He called it the Haven Line, a support system for intergenerational guardians raising children left behind. He didn't look at me while saying it, but I felt his words land like an anchor in my chest. For the first time in my life, I felt legacy not as something you receive, but something you leave behind, on purpose. The reporters asked questions after. I let Jonah handle them, calm, clear, unshaken. The young man who once couldn't sleep unless I hummed beside his bed now stood answering national journalists with poise. That boy was gone. This man had taken his place. Later that evening, we returned home. There was a stillness to the house that didn't feel heavy anymore. We made tea. I sat in the armchair. He sprawled across the couch, tired but relieved. I asked him if he felt like it was over now. He didn't answer right away. He sipped his tea, looked out the window. Then he said, "Not really." He said he didn't think something like that ever fully ended, that the damage done by abandonment wasn't a chapter you closed. It was a scar you grew around. But then he smiled, softly. He said, "Maybe now we're growing something over it." I looked at him. I saw my own father's quiet eyes in his face. I saw my husband's kindness. And most painfully, I saw a little of Monica's fierceness too, what it could have been, had it not turned bitter. I said, "You've done more than grow. You've built." He nodded. The next day, we mailed the final packet to the court. Not in defense, but in declaration. There would be no more claims to answer. The foundation had filed the paperwork for non-profit status. Jonah's name was listed as the founder and executive director. We didn't need revenge. We needed a roof no one could rip from under us again. And now, we had it. That night, as I folded laundry in the den, Jonah came in holding an envelope. His hand was shaking slightly. It was another letter. From Monica. He didn't open it. He placed it on the mantel. He said, "Maybe another day." I said, "Or maybe never." He nodded. We didn't speak of it again. The future was already calling louder than the past, and we had both decided to answer it, with full hearts, with steady hands, and without looking back. 3 months passed. The leaves began to change again, same way they did every year. But this time, they seemed brighter. Maybe I just noticed them more. Or maybe, after so many years living in the shadow of other people's choices, I had finally stepped back into the light of my own. The house was quieter now, but not lonely. Jonah still lived here part-time, coming and going with the rhythm of work and his foundation. He had his own space now downtown, but he said he liked keeping a room here, said it kept him grounded, said it reminded him of who built the first bricks of his life. Some days, I would find him sitting out back, on the old swing bench, sketching ideas for new programs, mapping out outreach plans for the Haven Line. Other times, I'd hear him on the phone, gently but firmly explaining to donors why this work wasn't charity. It was justice. He never raised his voice. But he never wavered, either. That he got from me. As for me, I was learning how to exhale. I went back to the things I used to love before the years of survival. I returned to my morning walks through the neighborhood, waved to the same neighbors I once avoided during the mess of Monica's court filings. I joined the library book club again. I started cooking new recipes, not because anyone asked me to, but because I could. One Saturday, I drove out to the old state park, the same one where I once took Jonah as a boy. We used to come with a peanut butter sandwich, a thermos of apple juice, and 2 notebooks. his for questions, mine for answers I didn't always have. This time, I went alone. I brought a blanket and sat under the same maple tree. The air was cool, but the sun was kind. I pulled out a notebook, not to write a plan, not to solve anything, just to reflect. I wrote, "I am not the woman they left behind." Then I stopped, because I realized that sentence wasn't true anymore. I was never the woman they left behind. I was the woman who stayed, the one who carried, the one who chose. I thought of Monica. I hadn't heard from her since the letter she sent after the press conference. Jonah never opened it. I didn't ask why. I understood that sometimes survival isn't about answers. It's about choosing silence that protects peace over words that break it again. I don't hate her. I say that not out of grace, but out of exhaustion. Hatred would mean I'm still holding the rope, and I'm done tugging at ghosts. If she wants to heal, that is her mountain to climb. Mine was different, and I climbed it already. I thought of my late husband, too. For a moment, I wondered what he would think of all this. Then I smiled. He would have been proud. Not because I fought, but because I ended it. Because I raised a boy into a man who chose to build something no one could tear down. When I came home that evening, I found Jonah in the kitchen. He had baked banana bread, said he had leftover bananas, and figured, why not? I laughed. It wasn't perfect, a little burnt at the edges, but it was real and warm, like this new quiet we had made for ourselves. That night, as I got into bed, I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes. I didn't dream of courtrooms or phone calls or doors slamming anymore. I dreamt of the color yellow, of hands in soil, of laughter across dinner tables, of a boy who never stopped believing he was wanted, and of a woman who, after all this time, finally started believing she was free. If you've ever carried a burden that wasn't yours to begin with, if you've ever raised a child you didn't plan to, loved someone who left without looking back, or stood in a storm with no one beside you, I hope this story reminded you of your strength. You are not alone, and your story, your version of quiet victory, still matters. Tell me what part stayed with you the most.